In 1995, the international community, led by NATO and the US, gathered to end a tragedy: ethnic cleansing during the collapse of Yugoslavia. This resulted in the Dayton Accords, a peace agreement ending the Bosnian War. Although hailed as a triumph in the eyes of the international community, the Accords ignored ethnic tension in Kosovo, igniting ethnic violence and sparking a refugee crisis. This tragedy of neglect cemented NATO policy changes that occurred in Bosnia, of active intervention in conflicts with non-NATO entities. After World War II, Yugoslavia was created as a socialist state comprised of 6 republics, with little attention to where borders were drawn. These 6 autonomous republics, Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Montenegro, and Macedonia, became regions where ethnic groups with conflicting cultural beliefs existed within the same border. Josip Tito, Yugoslavia's president, emphasized making Yugoslavia a melting pot amongst the many ethnic groups in the region, hoping to keep nationalistic ideas at bay. Tito managed to keep the peace despite these tensions, allowing for considerable growth and relative stability from the 1950s through the early 1970s. Following his death in 1980, opportunities arose for nationalistic ideology to gain traction in Yugoslavia, led by the Serb ethnic group. The Serbs are the largest ethnic group in Yugoslavia. They are Orthodox Christians who sought to use their large population and spread throughout Yugoslavia to attain power over the unified region and move toward a greater Serbian nation. With a failing economy and rumors of ethnic conflict arising, secession was discussed in Croatia and Slovenia. The international community, fearing war, heavily opposed to the dissolution of Yugoslavia. Nonetheless, on June 25, 1991, Croatia and Slovenia officially seceded from Yugoslavia. Seeing this, many in Bosnia, including the persecuted Bosniaks, or Bosnian Muslims, saw secession as a reality, seeking to escape from religious persecution by the Serb-controlled Yugoslavian government. Though initially angered by this, the Serbian government, now led by nationalistic Slobodan Milosevic, soon saw the opportunity to enact its plan of a greater Serbia by conquering Bosnia. As Bosnia transitioned toward independence in 1991, Serbia sought to exploit this vulnerability, creating Republika Srpska, an area within Bosnia populated mainly by Serbs. When Bosnia voted for independence in March of 1992, very few Bosnian Serbs voted. The tipping point was the European Union recognizing Bosnia's independence. It was a decision made to stop further tension, but it backfired. In the spring of 1992, by proxy, a Serbian-backed paramilitary invaded Bosnia and bordering parts of Croatia. The army swept through cities, killing Muslim men and boys over the age of 12 and raping women. They also sieged the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo. A month after the initial invasion, the UN sanctioned Serbia for backing this group and set up 6 safe areas in cities throughout Bosnia. This decision to intervene came to fruition after many disagreements between the European nations, neglecting the situation until it was too late. On July 6, 1995, Bosnian Serb General Ratko Mladic led his army of 20,000 into Srebrenica, one of the UN-sanctioned safe areas. Only 200 Dutch peacekeepers were protecting the city, using expired ammunition and outdated gear, neglecting the magnitude of the situation. Mladic and his army shelled the city and burned buildings down. This tragic genocidal act killed over 8,000 people. On August 28th, another Bosnian Serb atrocity was committed. In the crowded Markel Market Square in Sarajevo, a shell was fired, killing 43 Bosniaks. Scenes of these bloody events were broadcasted throughout the world, prompting intervention from the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. This was a first for the organization, as they had a prior policy only assisting NATO member nations, and Bosnia was not a member. NATO, being led by the US, began a major bombing campaign, targeting mainly important Serb checkpoints. After the shift in military momentum, the U.S. sent representatives in an attempt to lay down a framework for peace talks. On September 14th, Chief U.S. Peace Negotiator Richard Holbrooke assisted in reaching an agreement to end the siege of Sarajevo, setting up the framework for the final peace talks. Presidents of Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia were present, along with delegates from the U.S., Russia, Germany, France, the UK, and the EU, arrived at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. On November 1st, the accords started at the nearby Hope Hotel. Poor conditions of the hotel created a sense of urgency to finish the talks. Over 21 days, Holbrooke was able to keep the talks peaceful between countries with heavy conflict and tension. Towards the end of the talks, it seemed as if it was falling apart. However, at the 11th hour, Holbrooke rose triumphant and was able to broker the deal. The final agreement ended the bloody conflict that took 250,000 lives. The Dayton Agreement was complicated, but created a future for Bosnia. This agreement split Bosnia into two parts, the Muslim Croat Federation and the Serb-controlled Republika Srpska. Many parties, including Holbrooke, disagreed with giving the Serbs Bosnian land, as it appeared that genocide was being rewarded. Additionally, the agreement created a new constitution, attempting to create a government suitable for reconstruction. Many complained it created an overcomplicated system, believing little could be accomplished due to two ethnically divided parties. To keep the peace, the agreement ensured that the ceasefire continued, artillery was withdrawn, and NATO peacekeepers, known as I-4, occupied the territory. Also, a UN-authorized group comprised of NATO forces, known as the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, or I-4, will be deployed to keep the parties in check. Finally, a trade embargo was put in place on weapons and military vehicles for the parties. The U.S. heavily invested in the implementation of the Dayton Agreement. President Clinton authorized shipment of 7,000 troops to Bosnia to keep the peace. The Clinton administration held an ill-conceived notion that they could create a stable, self-sustainable Bosnia in close to 3 years and were inflexible concerning possible revisions. In the end, the U.S. spent over $1 billion in the implementation of the agreement. In the eyes of the international community, the Dayton Accords were a triumph. The agreement ended the violence and genocide in Bosnia and Herzegovina by enforcing a ceasefire. This allowed people to move back and begin rebuilding the country.
So anything that sort of stopped the bloodshed in that part of the world was, to me, a huge accomplishment.
The area was stabilized by I-4, which monitored and enforced military aspects of the agreement. From an international perspective, the enforced peace was relief. The West no longer had to send troops or support to the conflicted country. The agreement didn't attempt to deal with ethnic tension, leading to a Bosnia with ethnic groups that are resistant towards working together. After the Dayton Agreement resolved one conflict, it ended up being the cause of others. The Dayton Accords ended the violence in Bosnia, but created a tragedy of neglect in Kosovo. In 1999 Kosovo, ethnic tension between the Kosovar Albanians and the Serbs was rising, similar to Bosnia. As the Dayton Accords ended the war in Bosnia, the tension in Kosovo reached a peak and fighting broke out between the parties, leading to a refugee crisis. Over 1 million Kosovars left to escape the violence and were displaced from their homes. The Dayton Accords were a key factor in causing the crisis in Kosovo because it was not a comprehensive plan for all parties involved in the Yugoslavia separation. Due to lessons learned in Bosnia, NATO intervened quickly. This ended the crisis in Kosovo, but tension remained high. Early intervention by NATO prevented a second genocide. The Kosovo crisis cemented NATO's permanent shift in strategy and power in the global community. Although this led to greater international importance for NATO, Bosnia still remains a flawed nation. With the experience of a genocide, the country lies in a depressed state. This, along with poor infrastructure created by the Dayton Accords, leaves Bosnia broken.